Okay, so I hope you're able to see my screen and I'm audible. So today we'll be talking about diabetic kidney disease. First of all, sorry for the initial lag. There was some technical glitch and I couldn't start on time. Anyway, I'll try to complete on time. So we'll start with diabetic kidney disease. Basically, diabetes accounts for more than half of the patients you see on an OPD basis or whenever you come to even nephrology. More than 50% of the patients you see as writing diabetic kidney disease. So let us just see uh, what spectrum constitutes diabetic kidney diseases. So when I say kidney related issues in diabetic, what all comes to your mind? First of all, you would all probably be thinking of UTI. Uh, Actually, if someone can add people, that will be helpful. If there is anyone waiting in the lobby, otherwise I'll have to stop presentation, go back and add them. So if some one of you can add people, that will be helpful. Yeah. So going ahead, if we come to kidney related issues in diabetics, what comes to mind? So we usually think of UTI whenever there is uncontrolled sugars. They're prone to multiple infections, and it could range from anything. And when it comes to kidney, we'll think of urinary tract infections. Or when there is a severe pyelonephritis, a part of the papillae may get necrosed, and that may cause an ureteric obstruction, leading to obstruction. I mean, usually whether unilateral or bilateral. Bilateral is unlikely. Partial obstruction due to unilateral papillary necrosis is common in diabetics. That could be one etiology. The third is the topic of discussion today that we will be discussing in detail. It's diabetic nephropathy. And of course, this is a microvascular complication, whereas renovascular system, that is at the level of the vessels, it can as well get included at the macroscopic level or a macroscopic complication, leading to renal artery stenosis by a particular mechanism, what we regularly call as atherosclerotic renovascular disease. This apart, we have a number of drugs, particularly now with an extensive use of flozins, that is SGLT2 inhibitors, or the patient is on multiple diuretics for the management of edema, or you're using an ACE or an ARB inhibitor for controlling of blood pressure or otherwise control of proteinuria. They can cause complications or not prescribed medications by a nephrologist, such as NSAIDs, or the patient has got a recent contrast which has been given for any cardiological intervention planned. So, all these drugs can also create acute kidney injury in diabetics. Then there is an entity, what is called as non diabetic kidney disease. See, usually people get confused when I use the word non diabetic kidney disease. These are kidney diseases which are present in diabetic individuals, but the etiology is not related to diabetes. So, how do I put it? Like, suppose, let's say you're working in a COVID ward. So, any person who is in a COVID ward develops fever, cough, or cold, you will try to rule out COVID. That is the typical thing. But the person who is working in COVID ward can also get a disease which is not related to COVID, right? So, he is equally prone to get, say, bacterial pneumonia or viral influenza disease, something like that. So those diseases in diabetic individuals which are not caused by diabetes per se is what is referred to as non-diabetic kidney disease. Now, the next spectrum of disease would be an obstructive uropathy. Obstructive uropathy, you all know that diabetes makes us prone for cystopathy. There is neurological control which might not be adequate. This can cause a bladder incomplete emptying of the bladder or a cystopathy. So that could that could lead to an obstructive uropathy. This apart, there are multiple electrolyte imbalances, whether either related to the drugs or due to hyperglycemia or due to vomiting or certain fluid alterations. All these could cause electrolyte imbalances. So when we say, or whenever you see any patient who has got raised creatinine or any urinary abnormalities, you have to think in multiple angles, not that this patient is going to have diabetic nephropathy. First of all, you have to ascertain whether it is an acute or a chronic etiology, and if acute, what is the setting in which the kidney dysfunction has occurred. And based on these history or further examination, which we'll be further discussing, come to a conclusion. For the purpose of this class, we will be restricting ourselves to diabetic nephropathy. Let us try to know a little more about diabetic nephropathy. Now, sometimes you might have seen that we write diabetic nephropathy, or some times you see us writing diabetic kidney disease. Is there a difference between diabetic nephropathy and diabetic kidney disease, or is it all just used interchangeably? So now the preferred term is diabetic kidney disease. Basically, the terminology diabetic kidney disease, it is a clinical diagnosis. So when I say clinical diagnosis, you don't require a biopsy or a histological proof that this is a diabetic nephropathy. Diabetic nephropathy more relates to a specific pathological phenotype, whereas DKD is a broader term. It is like an umbrella term. It is a clinical diagnosis based upon albuminuria. Once you examine urine, if there is albuminuria, if there is decreased EGFR, and you are thinking that both of these are attributable uh, to diabetes, like both of them have occurred as an effect of diabetes, that is when you use the terminology diabetic kidney disease. Whereas diabetic nephropathy is a subtype of DKD. It is under the umbrella of DKD. It indicates a specific pathological phenotype. So if you are writing in the case sheet, you better write it as DKD, presumed CKD, or suspected DKD, likely DKD. Such would be a preferred terminology. Now, that said, let us see how do we say what is diabetic nephropathy or diabetic. Here, the actual terminology I should have put in was diabetic kidney disease. This was the older definition. This is from the 10th edition of Brenner's, where they say that diabetic nephropathy, it is a clinical syndrome characterized by three things. You have to have usually three features. There are exceptions. We'll come to the exceptions in a moment. So the first thing is you have to demonstrate that there is persistent albuminuria. See, it is not transient albuminuria. You have to have a persistent albuminuria. And even this albuminuria or proteinuria, if you are demonstrating, there shouldn't be any confounding features. Confounding features mean whenever there is uncontrolled blood pressures, whenever there is uncontrolled sugars, or whenever the patient is having an associated urinary tract infection, fever, or exercise, in all these conditions, albumin may be excreted even otherwise without diabetic nephropathy. So, when you are saying that the albuminuria is due to diabetic nephropathy, the patient's blood pressure should be controlled, glucose level should be controlled, there shouldn't be any associated infection, there shouldn't be any cause of ongoing gross hematuria. So that also you have to demonstrate. Out of three occasions, at least two occasions, you have to demonstrate albuminuria. So this is what is called as persistent albuminuria. So this persistent albuminuria, what is the grade of albuminuria? What is the quantity of albuminuria? More than 300 milligrams in 24 hours, or if you are comparing it to a gram of creatinine, more than 300 milligrams per gram of creatinine. That is persistent albuminuria, the first criterion. Now, the second thing which was classically described earlier was a relentless decline in GFR. You know, relentless means it just keeps going downhill and downhill without any, if you don't intervene, it is a relentless decline in GFR. So this, to put it more in perspective, the average GFR decline in a diabetic patient is about 10 to 12 ml per year or 1 ml per month you can take. That is, if you calculate an eGFR by whichever formula, the bedside CG for Cockcroft formula, and or you can use a CKD epi formula. So either one, if you calculate a GFR, there should be a decline in GFR which is associated with it. Third, there should be a raised blood pressure. So all these three things are necessary for diagnosing diabetic nephropathy. These lead to enhanced cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. This was the initial diagnostic criteria of diabetic nephropathy. Now, what was said was that albuminuria is the first sign of diabetic nephropathy, and peripheral edema is often the first symptom. They'll first notice that there is a swelling of the legs, most likely, or the dependent parts, whichever, the sacral edema. Unlikely for patients to notice a sacral edema. Usually, a leg swelling would often be the first symptom of diabetic nephropathy. This was how it was diagnosed. Now, if you are looking into the timeline of how diabetic nephropathy develops, see, once there is hyperglycemia, initially, whenever there is increased blood sugar, first thing to happen would be there is actually hyperfiltration. The mechanisms we will be coming up to it in a moment. So initially, there is hyperfiltration. Hyperfiltration means what? The GFR is higher than normal. You all know that the GFR varies between 120 ml per minute per body surface area to 140 ml per minute per body surface area, 1.73 meters square. So that in fact will go up because of this hyperglycemia. So that if you are translating it into creatinine, your creatinine may actually fall down from the baseline. So if my baseline creatinine was 0.8, if I were to develop hyperglycemia, my creatinine would actually fall down from 0.8 to 0.7 or zero point 0.6 based on the degree of hyperfiltration. That is when it is not clinically detectable. There is a high GFR. That is the first stage. But then there are a variety of damages that ensue. There could be cellular injury, mesangial expansion, glomerulosclerosis, and this is a spectrum actually. So on and so forth, whenever they develop, first thing that happens is microalbuminuria. The present preferred terminology is moderately increased albuminuria for microalbuminuria, and for macroalbuminuria, it is severely increased albuminuria. So when this microalbuminuria occurs, GFR is still normal. So at this stage, your GFR is still normal. Then what happens is it progresses to macroalbuminuria. What is micro and macroalbuminuria? Here are the definitions. This is just for recapitulation. As I said, the present preferred terminology is moderately increased and severely increased. If you are looking at, just remember two values. Are you looking at albumin or are you looking at protein in general? That is the question. If you are looking at albumin, normal albumin excretion per day is less than 30 milligrams. Anything between 30 to 300 is called as moderately increased. More than 300 milligrams is severely increased. This is with respect to albumin. This could be per day values, or you can actually compare it to a standard. Anything variable is usually compared to a standard. So if you're comparing albumin to creatinine, again it will be albumin per gram of creatinine. It is the same cutoff. Less than 30 is normal, 30 to 300 is moderately increased, more than 300 is severely increased. If you are looking at protein excretion rate, it goes to up to 150 because there are many other proteins apart from albumin. So up to 150 milligram is considered normal, 150 to 500 is moderate, and more than 500 is severely increased. So that said, uh, your microalbuminuria, that is when the albumin excretion is still less than 300 milligram, your GFR will still be normal. Only when it progresses to severely increased albuminuria will the GFR start getting or start declining, and then progresses to ESKD. When it is in this spectrum, there is a higher incidence of cardiovascular disease or infections or death. So this is what we discussed. This is the typical, correlation between albumin excretion and the eGFR decline. Albumin excretion is the earliest sign, starts as microalbuminuria, progresses to macroalbuminuria. When it is progressing to macroalbuminuria, you can see that the eGFR starts declining. This is related to the duration of diabetes. The relationship between the onset of diabetes and onset of proteinuria and decline of GFR is all very well established in type 1 diabetes. In type 1 diabetes, you can almost always say that from the onset, the diabetic kidney diseases begins after 5 years of uh, the duration of diabetes. Whereas in type 2 diabetes, because it is more insidious and the patient might not have noticed, usually it so happens that if you screen them, even at onset of type 2 diabetes, they may have already albuminuria or they may have already a declining GFR, depending upon the insidious nature or the degree of glycemic control what it was. Type 1 is more dramatic. There the timeline is much more fixed. After 5 years, the albumin excretion starts going up, and eventually once it progresses, the GFR starts coming down. So this is the typical curve. Now, there is one newer concept which I wanted to draw your attention. So far, I've been telling you that albuminuria is important, proteinuria is important. But recently, presence of proteinuria is not must or is not mandatory for us to diagnose diabetic kidney disease. There is a small subtype of diabetic nephropathy where they can directly present with decreased GFR without an albuminuria, without having gone through those traditional stages of microalbuminuria, macroalbuminuria, and then end stage renal disease. They needn't have gone through that. They may directly have gone to the increased GFR or rather end stage kidney disease. So this is called as non-proteinuric diabetic kidney disease. The mechanisms they're postulating for this is one, now almost everyone, once they have hypertension, ACE inhibitors and ARBs are being used as a first line drug. So that could be influencing the proteinuria detection, and therefore you might not be able to rely completely on proteinuria because there will be a confounding factor of someone being on a ACE or an ARB. The second thing is, this proteinuria is a microvascular manifestation. Basically, it is at the level of the glomerular capillaries, right? What happens if there is a macrovascular disease? As I was telling, the bigger vessels which supply blood to the renal artery, if that is getting involved early in the diabetic kidney disease, it is just like renal artery stenosis. So there, the proteinuria may not be a significant feature for us to pick up diabetic kidney disease due to proteinuria alone. So this is one newer concept where you should also know that even without proteinuria, diabetic kidney disease can be diagnosed. Though the traditional, if you ask me, the conventional thing, it is through microalbuminuria, macroalbuminuria, and diabetic kidney disease. There are papers on these. This is called non-proteinuric diabetic kidney disease. There are reports from India too. So that is just for your information. This is what I was speaking about. So there is never an increase much, going up to the macroalbuminuria level. It is either normoalbuminuria or microalbuminuria. But if you see, EGFR starts declining. This is contrary to what we saw earlier. This is of late being diagnosed as a newer, or what should I say, a different phenotype of diabetic kidney disease. Okay. So now, why are we so worried whether albumin is increased or GFR is worsening? How does it portray regarding the mortality of the patient? Is it just because we have to initiate dialysis or we should do something, or is there any other reason why we have to pick up? So as you can see that the albuminuria and impaired GFR have a direct effect on the cumulative mortality incidence. So this is the cumulative mortality incidence. Suppose there's a diabetic who doesn't have kidney disease, his mortality risk is only 4.1%. Compare that to a person who has got albuminuria as well as a worsened GFR. His mortality rate is almost 47%. So that is why you should pick up them early, institute therapies or promote therapies which halt the progression, and try to reverse it. The therapeutic strategies we'll be dealing with in the next class. So now here, today we'll discuss clinically how do we diagnose diabetic kidney disease and how do we differentiate a non-diabetic kidney disease and how to work up. That will be the next part of my talk. So now clinical clues for diagnosis of DKD is there are certain subtle features. Say suppose a patient who is well controlled, has always been having good glycemic control on a certain set of medications or insulin, suddenly starts developing hypoglycemic episodes. That is when you should suspect DKD. If they say that blood pressure, blood glucose level is falling down, this is because once the creatinine starts going up, the excretion of both insulin or the OHS or whichever anti-diabetic medications you are using comes down. So once they are not excreted from the body, patients tends to have hypoglycemia. So if hitherto a normal patient starts developing hypoglycemic episodes and you don't have any alternative explanation for the same, you should suspect diabetic kidney disease. That is one clue. The second thing is similar thing regarding hypertension. How diabetic kidney disease worsens hypertension, I'll tell you. But whenever a patient who's hitherto had a normal blood pressure suddenly starts having a accelerated blood pressure or newly diagnosed hypertension, worsening hypertension, you should suspect diabetic kidney disease. That is the second thing to happen. Of course, if you evaluate, as we were speaking, you will have an elevated creatinine, translates to a fall in EGFR. Uh, EGFR calculation, you all know, CKD epi, you can have the calculator and calculate a bedside EGFR. Or albuminuria, as I said, after ruling out other confounding factors, persistent albuminuria on 2 out of 3 occasions without the patient having uncontrolled blood sugar, uncontrolled blood pressure, there shouldn't be a coexistent infection. In such cases, if you're diagnosing albuminuria, that also indicates that the patient is going to develop diabetic kidney disease. And then comes what we routinely ask for, fundus, ophthalmological evaluation. Now, why do we ask for this ophthalmological evaluation? What is the role of diabetic retinopathy? Diabetic retinopathy is also a microvascular complication. What is the link between diabetic retinopathy and diabetic kidney disease is the question. The diabetic retinopathy is present in almost all patients of type 1 diabetic nephropathy. So if some patient, let us say type 1 diabetic nephropathy patient, you are suspecting that the renal disease is due to diabetic nephropathy, you do a fundus. If you find a positive finding, diabetic retinopathy is present in that patient, it almost, that I'm saying 95% confirmatory that this is coexistent diabetic nephropathy itself. This is called as concordance rate. Like it is easier to look for fundus than to do a biopsy, right? Fundus is a non-invasive test. Whereas in a type 1 diabetic patient, if you don't find diabetic retinopathy and there is a nephropathy or there is deranged creatinine and albuminuria going on, it almost indicates that you have to work up for some other etiology. It is not going because the concordance rate or the correlation between diabetic retinopathy and diabetic nephropathy in a type 1 diabetes is very, very high. What happens in type 2 diabetes? The concordance is still there. The predictive value you can still have. Like if you are suspecting diabetic nephropathy, 50 to 60% of those patients will also have diabetic retinopathy, but 40% may still not have. But if you have, it is supportive of your diagnosis that this is diabetic kidney disease. Once it comes as no diabetic retinopathy, you will have to keep in your mind any alternative. Is it consistent with the natural history? Are there any other alternate possible diagnosis? So it is an indicator that it could be an NDKD. That is why we ask for fundus. So I hope this concordance rate is clear. Basically, diabetic retinopathy, it's the correlation between diabetic retinopathy and diabetic nephropathy. Now, a few slides on the pathogenesis of diabetic nephropathy. This is important because I wanted to highlight the therapeutic strategies in the next class. So if you know a little bit about pathogenesis, this was useful. So in diabetes, whatever microvascular complications, or this is supposed to be microvascular complications or macrovascular complications, is due to two major pathways. If you get a question in exam, you can just write it in two major headings. One is the hemodynamic changes which happen. The second is the metabolic changes. Don't worry about the complicated chart. We will make it simple. So you can have hemodynamic changes and the metabolic changes. Let us first see what are the hemodynamic changes which happen. So this is at the level of a nephron. This is the afferent arteriole. This is the efferent arteriole. What happens in diabetes is there is a decrease in afferent arteriolar resistance. So here the resistance decreases. What happens in the efferent arteriole? Here the resistance goes up. So once the resistance comes down here and goes up here, what happens? There is increased blood flow here, but it is unable to go out. This is what leads to the classical glomerular hyperfiltration theory. So here if you see, this is what happens in diabetes. This is the normal where both are balanced. In diabetes, what happens? The afferent arteriole gets dilated, whereas the efferent gets constricted. Now this causes a lot of glomerular hyperfiltration. This glomerular hyperfiltration or increased pressure within the glomerulus is responsible for glomerular loss of proteins. Now, so far, I hope it is clear. That is why we'll be using ACE or an ARB as a strategy to relieve this glomerular hyperfiltration. Now, so what? So what if glomerular hyperfiltration occurs? Once there is glomerular hyperfiltration, there is loss of proteins. There are multiple cytokines through which pass through. You should know that albumin passing into the proximal tubule, albuminuria itself worsens the proximal tubular epithelial damage. That is one thing. Now, what causes this afferent arteriolar reduction? There are multiple vascular factors. There are tubular signals. Similarly, what causes an increase in the vascular factors? There is a number of what do angiotensin 2 or thromboxane A2, certain vascular VEGF and all those factors which increase the afferent arteriolar resistance. So an imbalance between an afferent arteriolar pressure and an efferent arteriolar pressure causing an increase in the glomerular filtration pressures, thereby leading to loss of albumin. So this is the hemodynamic effects of diabetes. So this causes shear stress and an increase in damage. Now keep this apart. Let us come to the metabolic pathway. What are the metabolic effects of diabetes? One, there is hypoglycemia. Second, there is also dyslipidemia. In dyslipidemia, what we are more or most worried about is oxidized LDL and the free fatty acids which are circulating. This hyperglycemia causes activation of multiple factors. Here, just remember two factors. One is transforming growth factor beta. The second one is called as advanced glycation end products. So these AGEs are they are non-enzymatic glycation of proteins. So they are just it is not mediated through any enzyme. The non-enzymatic glycation of proteins is what is called as advanced glycation end products. Similarly, in dyslipidemia, you have two things. One is oxidized LDL and FFA. These four factors, that is TGF beta, AGE, oxidized LDL, and FFA, act on the receptors of their own. There are scavenging receptors. These are the receptors for AGEs, or this is the transforming growth factor beta receptor. So they act on their respective receptors, causing an variation in intracellular signaling. This intracellular signaling, how does it happen? If at all you want to know at the molecular level, this is called as epigenetics. Epigenetics can actually be a question for you, I think. So the term epigenetics means that there is a modification of the histone proteins. I think you remember the DNA model. So there is a post-translational modification of histone proteins, and basically this alters the way the genes are expressed, whether it is an RNA expression or the control of the genes and how they affect the cellular growth, regulation, inflammation, that is modified by these intracellular signaling. This in turn leads to a changed or a different direction of a cellular proliferation, causing inflammation, proliferation, and angiogenesis. Sorry, yeah. Uh, that is what leads to the macrovascular complications and the microvascular complications of diabetes. So at the beginning or the onset, you have got the hemodynamic effects and the metabolic effects. In the metabolic effects, concentrate on the blood glucose and the lipids. So all these would be our therapeutic strategies. So that is why we would want a good blood sugar control, why we have to address or have certain lipid targets, what we can do to reduce the hemodynamic side effects. Each of these pathways become a therapeutic strategy. So this is in brief about the diabetic nephropathy pathogenesis. Okay. So I was talking about hypertension worsening in diabetic nephropathy. How do hypertension and type 2 diabetes, how is it related or how does it correlate? So here again, one, it could be the hypertension could be a part of the metabolic syndrome, obesity, insulin resistance, hyperleptinemia, sympathetic activation. This could be causing hypertension. What other factors could be contributing to hypertension in a type 2 diabetes patient would be that this hyperglycemia is affecting, and it is affecting all the blood vessels. Similarly, the way it is affecting the glomerular vessels and the glomerular endothelium, it could also be simultaneously affecting all the vasculature, right? So that is what is called as microvasculopathy, and that could be causing hypertension. Hyperglycemia can lead to an activation of the RAS system, increased angiotensin 2, that is causing hypertension. Lastly, there could be a variation in the lipid profile. These lipids cause a macrovasculopathy or plaques getting deposited at multiple levels of blood vessels. That itself could cause to hypertension. And of course, now newer and newer precision medicine as it is coming, showing there are multiple genetic factors in type 2 diabetics, which makes them also prone concurrently for hypertension. So it could be a part of metabolic syndrome. It could be due to hyperglycemia. It could be due to a dyslipidemia, which is an effect of hyperglycemia, or it could be the genetic factors. All these factors contribute to the development of hypertension in type 2 diabetics. So, what is the average rate? See, suppose there are 100 patients with diabetes. On an average, one third of them go on to develop diabetic nephropathy. The remaining two thirds do not develop diabetic nephropathy. There are a lot of factors which makes someone prone for diabetic nephropathy. Depicted in this picture is some of the factors which increase the rate of progression of diabetic nephropathy. See, obesity, depending on their dietary protein, that to the type of protein, whether they're on a vegetarian diet or a non-vegetarian diet. Smoking increases diabetic nephropathy. Oligonephropathy means if there are the number of nephrons are low. See, suppose someone is born with low nephrons. There is a theory called as Barker's hypothesis in pediatrics, where a low birth weight baby is born with a lower number of nephrons, whereas a term baby or born after complete maturity, the number of nephrons will be normal for the age. So if there is a person who is born with a decreased reserve of nephrons or low number of nephrons, obviously his kidney is going to fail much earlier because the working units are lesser. So that is what is meant by oligonephropathy. Then lipid control, glycemic control, proteinuria. I told per se proteinuria can worsen the onset and progression of diabetic nephropathy. There could also be glomerular hypertension and systemic blood pressure, which worsen the diabetic nephropathy. So these are some of the promoters of progression of diabetic nephropathy, which we can alter as medical professional. We can change at least whatever is modifiable risk factors, we can address those and prevent the progression of diabetic nephropathy. So this is one image. There are a lot of diabetic nephropathy histopathology classification and grading. I didn't want to go into the details of it because it's a very vast topic. This is excuse me, just for interest. So what is marked in the asterisk here? These are the Kimmelstein-Wilson lesions. The first change, in fact, in diabetic nephropathy is the thickening of the glomerular basement membrane. Because of increased deposition, the glomerular basement membrane thickens. Then there is increase in the mesangial matrix. So this is what is shown. This is an electron microscopy photo. This is the Kimmelstein-Wilson lesions. Here again demonstrated is the increased GBM thickening. This is when you look at it in an immunofluorescence, there is a linear staining pattern. This is due to non-specific trapping of albumin. You don't have to remember the histopathology if you don't want to, but these are basically of interest. That's all. So now let us briefly go into, we saw how to certain clinical clues, how to diagnose diabetic nephropathy and the definition of diabetic nephropathy and all those aspects. Now let us in brief look at the natural history. So what is the natural history of a disease means without any intervention. Like if I don't intervene, how does the disease takes its course? So that is what is called as natural history. Why do we need to know the natural history is because any deviation from what is supposed to be happening will give us a clue whether this is a diabetic nephropathy or a non-diabetic kidney disease. That is why you should know the natural history. So just one or two slides on that. As I said, usually it begins after 5 years. It starts with microalbuminuria. At that stage, GFR, this is GFR, the GFR will still be normal here, or in fact there will be hyperfiltration going on, so creatinine will be lesser than usual. The albuminuria, as the years progress, gradually tends to increase. So it progresses from microalbuminuria to macroalbuminuria. When it is progressing to macroalbuminuria, the GFR starts declining and eventually reaches end stage renal disease. So this is the natural history of diabetic nephropathy. So if you are just looking at the proteinuria, if there are 100 patients, if they don't have 100 patients of diabetes without any nephropathy, on an average per year, 2% of them, just remember 2, 2 and 2. So 2% of them, that is 98 will still be normal, 2% progress to microalbuminuria. Of 100 patients of microalbuminuria per year, 2% progress to macroalbuminuria. Of 100 patients of macroalbuminuria, 2% progress to an increase in the creatinine or requiring renal replacement therapy. So this is the scheme of flow. Without any nephropathy, first there will be microalbuminuria, then there will be macroalbuminuria, then they go on to develop an increase in creatinine. So you can see this is the usual course. If someone without nephropathy is directly going on to the stage of macroalbuminuria, that chance is very, very low. It's almost 0.1%. That is much less compared to this 2%, the regular rate of progression. Similarly, someone who had microalbuminuria directly going on to elevated plasma creatinine is also only roughly about 0.3%. So what you have to understand is if they are skipping stages, if you have been following up a patient, if they are skipping stages like that, then you have to look for an alternative explanation for the same. Is it due to some other disease? What was the explanation for someone to directly progress from microalbuminuria to elevated plasma creatinine? Such would be the thinking. Now that is put more in perspective. So if there is any deviation from this natural history, you have to evaluate further to see whether it is just diabetes or some other disease is causing these things. So that is one clue is there is a rapidly declining GFR. What did I say? GFR on an average in a diabetic patient comes down by 10 to 12 ml per year. So if you have a rapidly declining GFR, say in June it was 1, now in December it is already 10 or 11, you calculate the GFR. You have to calculate GFR, don't go by creatinine values. So if you calculate the GFR and the GFR decline is more than what is anticipated for diabetic nephropathy, you have to think of a non-diabetic kidney disease. That is clue number 1. Second is refractory hypertension. Agreed that hypertension is common and it worsens the prognosis of diabetic nephropathy, begins with diabetic nephropathy. We saw all the mechanisms. But the terminology used is refractory hypertension. Now, refractory hypertension is defined as requirement of 5 drugs, at least of which one is a long-acting thiazide-like drug. You have a requirement of 5 drugs for control of hypertension. So if you are using 5 different classes of drugs for to be specific, of which one is a long acting thiazide like diuretic. So if you are requiring such a high class of diuretics, then again there is a possibility that it could be a macrovascular disease like a renal artery stenosis, or there is some other etiology which is causing the renal disease. That is clue number 2. Presence of active urinary sediments, meaning all throughout I've been speaking about proteinuria. Nowhere did I say, or if you read up, you will find RBCs, particularly dysmorphic RBCs. So if you are seeing any patient with some RBCs can be seen because of what to say, microaneurysm rupture. They are always few RBCs. Any gross hematuria, dysmorphic RBCs being seen, many RBCs being seen, say the field is filled with RBCs. So, that is not a typical case of diabetic nephropathy at all. So there you have to evaluate for an alternative etiology. That is clue number 3. In addition, you have got signs or symptoms of other systemic diseases. Say, if you have joint pain or some features of lupus, say the patient is having oral ulcers or hair fall or alopecia, something. So there are symptoms and signs of other systemic disease. Of course, you have to evaluate for alternative causes. Then the last one is a subtle indicator. Once you think that it is diabetic nephropathy, you initiate them on an ACE ARB because that is one of the therapeutic strategy. But once you start ACE ARB, the patient unexpectedly has a decline in GFR. Some variation in creatinine with ACE ARB is expected and is accepted also. But if there is a 30% or more reduction of GFR, once you start ACE ARB, you will have to think of a macrovascular disease or a renal artery stenosis, which is being worsened by the introduction of an ACE ARB. So these are certain clues that it might not be diabetic nephropathy alone and something else is contributing for the renal disease. So this is a direct picture from Brenner. So these are the list of criteria for kidney biopsy. Normally in diabetic nephropathy, we don't biopsy, right? If you do a biopsy, it has to change the management or it has to aid in better prognosis or some other use has to be there for us to do an invasive procedure. So for us to do kidney biopsy, these are the indications. Just remember that directly nephrotic range proteinuria without diabetic retinopathy. This I spoke about in detail. This is more true in case of type 1 diabetes. In type 2 diabetes also it is 50 to 60%, 40% may or may not have. But in any patient, if you are not finding diabetic retinopathy, you will have to be careful and evaluate for alternative causes. Nephrotic range proteinuria when the duration of diabetes is less than 5 years. This again holds good more for type 1 diabetes than type 2 diabetes. Type 2 at onset itself, they can have a kidney failure. Any nephrotic range proteinuria with normal kidney function. If you remember the chart, when there was an increase in albumin, simultaneously the kidney function also started declining. So if the patient is having massive proteinuria, say 10 grams, 11 grams proteinuria, but kidney function is totally normal, 0.7, that is when you will have to think of an alternative explanation. That is point number 3. Unexplained microscopic hematuria or acute kidney injury, which you are not able to explain, any active sediments basically. And the last one, as I've been emphasizing, a rapid worsening renal function, which you are not able to explain by any other alternative etiology. So these are the indications for renal biopsy in a patient with diabetes. So with this background, to make the points more clear, let us just go through quickly the three case scenarios. I'll take another 10-15 minutes maybe, and then we'll wind up. So this is one patient who is currently in ward. He is a 31-year-old male. He's got hypertension since 2 months, diabetes since 2 months, and then on further history, there was he was diagnosed pyelonephritis. There was papillary necrosis, probably. He was diagnosed HUN at that point, underwent bilateral DJ stenting. It was removed 2 months back. So now he's come to us with bilateral pedal edema, facial puffiness, and basically an anasarca like presentation. This is the clinical examination. And this is the urine routine, which is showing albumin 3 plus. Presently, there is no UTI. Urine PCR was done, it was 5.77. 24-hour urine protein was 10.2 grams per day. Fundoscopy was normal. His creatinine is 0.96 and albumin is 1.54. So now this patient, what would you think? Do I have any volunteers? Anyone wants to put in their thoughts? I actually can't see how many of you are there. So anyway, I'll try to say it myself. So here the things which you would note are one, his duration of diabetes is only 2 months, right? I've been emphasizing it is 5 years. Okay, agreed that it is more for type 1. Type 2, even at onset, could be there. So this may or may not be there. Okay, agreed. But then if you see that his proteinuria is 10.2 grams, he's got this massive proteinuria, whereas his creatinine is normal, 0.96. And so this was what I was saying. So from macroalbuminuria, then they progress to an elevated plasma creatinine here. So if you come to the indications of renal biopsy, nephrotic range proteinuria with a normal kidney function. He fits into that, right? He's got a proteinuria of 10.2 grams. There is nephrotic, that is nephrotic range. Anything more than 3.5 grams is nephrotic range. His albumin is low. His lipid profile is deranged. So nephrotic syndrome is without doubt. The duration is less. The fundus is normal. Creatinine is normal. So all these are indicators that there could be an alternative explanation to his kidney disease, and it might not be attributable to diabetes alone. So this is one patient whom we are planning to do renal biopsy. Basically, we have to rule out non-diabetic kidney disease. So this is just one slide. When we say non-diabetic kidney disease, what are the diseases which we are thinking? All the other glomerular diseases which we see in the general population, be it IgA or membranous nephropathy or post-infectious glomerulonephropathy, all these glomerular diseases can also occur in a diabetic nephropathy patient, right? So this is what is called as non-diabetic renal diseases. These are multiple other non-glomerular diseases. So in him, we are planning a biopsy. Let's see what it comes up. So many times it so happens that there have been literature also. You suspect that it is a non-diabetic kidney disease, you biopsy, and it might finally still turn out to be a diabetic kidney disease. That is a different issue. But the evaluation protocol in a patient when there are so many odd features against diagnosing a typical diabetic nephropathy, with a normal fundus, with a gross proteinuria, short duration of diabetes, and a normal renal function, we have to rule out a other etiology, non-diabetic kidney disease, because the management will change. Suppose it is IgA nephropathy, or suppose it is membranous nephropathy, the management will differ. Here I'll be using immunosuppression, maybe Ponticelli regimen using steroids or cyclophosphamide. Similarly in IgA nephropathy or SLE also it will be different. Whereas in diabetes, if you keep thinking it is diabetic nephropathy, the therapeutic angle would be different. That is the importance of picking up a non-diabetic renal disease. So this is another patient. These slides were also prepared by Pranam, I think. So this gentleman, he's come with a he's a known diabetic. He's a long-standing diabetic. He is a diabetic for over 8 years. Of late has developed hypertension. You remember I was telling this is one indicator which may say that the diabetic nephropathy is beginning. So of late he's been diagnosed hypertension. Now has come with bilateral lower limb swelling, facial puffiness, and some burning micturition, and also had one episode of recorded hypoglycemia. So the recorded hypoglycemia, the new onset of hypertension, all these are pointers towards probably that it is a diabetic nephropathy. But further evaluation, when they traced, see his creatinine in November was 2.9. And when he presented further, it went up to a peak of 6.69. So basically, this is the albumin, and there are not much of active sediments. If you look at it grossly, it looks like almost everything is fitting into the diabetic nephropathy. I told you the duration of diabetes is okay. In fact, his fundus, I don't know if it is mentioned, yeah, fundus was also bilateral NPDR changes were present. Normal size kidneys, or actually slightly smaller. In diabetes, the kidney size is always preserved or bulkier. It is usually not smaller until and unless it is a burnt out CKD. So PCR is in the nephrotic range. Then there was poor glycemic control. HbA1c was higher than the target. So most of it fits into the traditional diabetic nephropathy. But what is the only odd feature here is the creatinine, which was 2.9 here, has progressed to 6.85. If you look at an EGFR calculation, never just go by the numerical values of creatinine, look at the EGFR. If you calculate EGFR, I just did before taking the class. So if you do by CKD epi equation, this 2.9 comes to an EGFR of 21 ml per minute. Whereas if you do it for 6.85, it comes to 8 ml per minute. So a drop from 21 to 8 is almost a drop of the 13 ml per minute. So over a span of say 10 to 12 days, he has lost an EGFR of 13. That means there is some other pathology which is going on here. So either it is a rapidly progressive renal failure due to some other etiology, like say superimposed infection related glomerulonephritis, or more likely in this case there was an acute insult in term of an urinary tract infection. So there was a superimposed insult on a previous diabetic nephropathy patient, which possibly caused this worsening of creatinine. So this patient, if he had not improved after treatment of the urinary tract infection, I didn't find a urine culture of this patient. So if he had not improved after, if his creatinine has further gone on to worsen, or if there was no other factors like urosepsis which was explainable, this patient would have been a candidate for biopsy because of a rapidly progressive renal failure, which is not explainable by diabetic nephropathy alone. But he improved apparently with antibiotic treatment and the treatment of UTI. And I think his creatinine came down and he went home without a renal biopsy. So this is done to show the the progression and the importance of looking at the previous creatinine values and the EGFR calculation. Okay. So now the last case. So this is a 31-year-old male. He was a type 1 diabetes, diagnosed at 20 years of age. Now he was recently admitted with volume overload in unit 4, I think. I didn't have the biochemical investigation, but he had severe PDR changes, had a progressive proteinuria. By progressive proteinuria, I mean that he had gone in through stages of microalbuminuria, macroalbuminuria, and then a increase in creatinine. His present creatinine was somewhere around to the tune of 2.8, I think, and there were no active sediments. This is what is the classical history of diabetic nephropathy. So the duration of diabetes is correlating. The diabetic retinopathy, I told that 95% concordance rate is there. He had a pass through microalbuminuria, macroalbuminuria, and then renal failure. There are no active sediments, normal size kidneys. So him you wouldn't have to do a renal biopsy. You can directly go and say that this is likely a diabetic kidney disease and go on to control. So the last chart, if you have to see any patient with diabetes and proteinuria, first thing, rule out all other causes, whether there is a urinary tract infection. Is this protein due to any red cell or uncontrolled blood sugars or uncontrolled hypertension? Once you rule out all these, it is not infection and it is the proteinuria is not spurious and is actually proteinuria due to diabetes itself. Quantitate the proteinuria. Ideal one would be to do a 24-hour urine protein. If not possible, at least a urine PCR. Look at the renal size. If you are thinking of a rapid decline or active sediments and you are thinking of some other causes of RPGN, such as ANCA or C3C4 or some, so those investigations might be required. Once you have done this, if you feel that it is a typical diabetic kidney disease progressing as expected in terms of duration, in terms of retinopathy, in terms of proteinuria evaluation and progression, there are no RBCs and enlarged kidneys, no need to do renal biopsy, directly put it as diabetic kidney disease. Whereas if the course is atypical, there is no retinopathy, as I showed the first patient, 2 months history of diabetes, there is no history of having gone through microalbuminuria, now directly nephrotic range proteinuria, or if you are seeing red cells or macroscopic hematuria, you have to consider other alternative etiology and go ahead for biopsy. There could be other explanations. Not everything is glomerular, right? There could be other compartment also. There could have been multiple infections, or there could have been tuberculosis or renovascular diseases. In a diabetic, they are also prone for such conditions. If you are able to establish those conditions which are not glomerular and you have an etiology for that, again, no need to do renal biopsy because it won't yield any infection. In a renovascular disease, it will just show some ischemic nephrons. That's all. So if you have had recurrent history of UTI or past history of renal tuberculosis or renovascular diseases, even though the course is atypical, it is not a glomerular disease and you have got an alternative explanation for the same, no need to do a renal biopsy. So this is basically the gist of approach or to a patient with diabetes and proteinuria. Uh, to make it simple, see whether it is acute or chronic, first thing. If it is acute, look for the factors: infections, drugs, recent contrast, recent NSAIDs, all those things. If it is chronic, think, is it consistent with diabetic kidney disease or is it non-diabetic kidney disease? To see whether it is diabetic kidney disease, you will have to see the proteinuria, the rate of progression, and any associated extrarenal microvascular complications such as diabetic retinopathy or suitable macrovascular complications. So this is how you differentiate between the etiology of kidney disease in a patient with diabetes. With that, we come to the end of the lecture. So these are the references. Just a second. Yeah. So, yeah, any questions or anything which is not clear, we can take up those things. If you want me to stop recording, I'll stop so that you can speak.